Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll examine a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with the global impact of the Trump-Netanyahu war on Iran as energy prices rise steeply after Israel's strike on Iran's major gas field and Iran's retaliation against Qatar, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. Joining us is David Hearst, the editor of the Middle East Eye, who was formerly the chief foreign leader writer of The Guardian and its former associate foreign editor, European editor, Moscow bureau chief, European correspondent, and Ireland correspondent. We will discuss his article at Middle East Eye, Why Trump and Netanyahu Are the Most Dangerous Men on the Planet. Then, as U.S. Marine Expeditionary Forces head to the Gulf for undefined missions, we'll speak with Mann, Associate Director for Policy and Campaigns at Win Without War. His advocacy and public commentary focuses on reforming U.S. Middle East policy and illuminating the connections between foreign and domestic policy. Harrison is a former U.S. Army major assigned to the Defense Intelligence Agency who resigned in protest of DoD support for the Israel military during its war on Gaza. We'll discuss his article at Responsible Statecraft, Seizing Iran's Crown Jewel Would Be a Suicide Mission. An operation to hold Tehran's oil hostage by taking over Kharg Island would end up delivering the regime hostages of its own. Then finally we'll speak with Mike Lofgren, who formerly spent 28 years working in Congress as a Republican aide, 16 of which as a senior national security analyst on the House and Senate budget committees. He is the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Party is Over, How Republicans Went Crazy, Democrats Became Useless, and the Middle Class Got Shafted. And he has an article at the Washington Monthly, Asymmetrical War in Iran, How Trump and the U.S. Are Being Played. We're depleting our big, expensive Cold War-inspired defensive weapons on Iran's cheap drones. And if Tehran expands its underwater drone program, look out. And before we begin with Trump having bombed 7 countries and started a war against Iran, while at home his ICE thugs terrorize and break up families, murdering American citizens in the process, the need to rid the country of the deeply unpopular Trump kakistocracy and his clown car cabinet could not be more urgent. But these crooks and criminals would do anything to stay in power as their billionaire buddies buy up the mainstream media and the mob boss intimidates Republican politicians. Only people power can beat money power, and we need all hands on deck as we continue to do our part delivering a daily public service providing the facts and evidence to inform the majority of what they are up against and how to win back our country, our decency, and the respect of the community of nations. You can help save America's 250-year-old democracy by making a tax-deductible donation at backgroundbriefing.org/donate or at publictruthmedia.org, and thank you. And joining us now from the UK is David Hearst, the editor of Middle East Eye, who was formerly the chief foreign leader writer of The Guardian and its former associate foreign editor, European editor, Moscow bureau chief, European correspondent, and Ireland correspondent. And he has an article at Middle East Eye, Why Trump and Netanyahu Are the Most Dangerous Men on the Planet. Welcome to Background Briefing, David Hearst.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. And I'd like to talk to you about the global impact of the Netanyahu-Trump war on Iran as energy prices are spiking. And now that Israel has struck Iran's major gas field, the Iranians have retaliated against Qatar, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. Now, Trump has posted on Truth Social that he had nothing to do with the Israeli strike on the Pars gas field. But the Israelis are contradicting that, saying, no, we were coordinated with the U.S. So who are we to believe here, David?
Well, this is an example of the war going out of control. You've got two partners that closely coordinate everything they do, and they have done since ground zero on nearly 3 weeks ago now. And within an hour, their joint strategy went completely out of control. This is a very interesting or very typical example of how this war has gone out of control, the war they started. Now, Iran said very, very clearly, even after this attack, Iran said there were definite red lines. And one of them was if you hit our Karg Island and if you hit our natural gas facilities, we've got a range of targets to choose from, literally just right across the pond from us, and we'll do it. And that was clearly understood. And Israel breached those red lines. What happened was that Iran, with one strike, has attacked a Qatari hub responsible for 1/5 of the world's liquefied natural gas. That is at Ras Laffan. Now, what they've the damage to this particular facility, which is larger, it's roughly a third the size of New York City, is they knocked out two of Qatar's 14 LNG trains and one of its two gas to liquid facilities, wiping out 17% of LNG export capacity. Now, in global terms, that will have, according to energy analysts that we talk to, a longer lasting effect and probably eclipse Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And it will take years to mend, and we're all going to feel the prices of it. Now, Iran clearly signaled that if you hit our stuff, we're going to hit your stuff. There's no secret about it. In fact, even before the war, they said the second time we are attacked, I talked to the deputy foreign minister, in London when he was here, he said, look, the next time we're attacked, we are going to treat this as an existential attack and we're going to attack everyone within our reach, and we're going to make sure the world pays for it. And this is exactly what has happened. So, I described this partnership between Trump and Netanyahu, between an ego-driven man who thinks he can literally boss around the whole world, and a partnership between him and someone who is fundamentally a religious fundamentalist, who believes he's on a mission from God to establish Greater Israel and to slay people that he calls Amalek. That partnership is extremely dangerous, and we've just seen now why. This is not going to be patched up quickly, and the damage to just this particular incident I'm talking about as a sort of microcosm of what this war is doing will affect prices in Asia. The LNG prices have soared, and they're not going to come down soon.
So when you talk about the Russia's war on Ukraine, which obviously once the Nord Stream pipelines were blown up, that closed off a long-standing deal that the Europeans had with cheap Russian gas. And then they've sort of had to cast around, and to some extent LNG coming from the US has filled the gap, but also LNG coming from the Gulf now. So the Europeans don't have that anymore. Neither do the Asian markets, China, Japan, South Korea, etc. So let's look at the global picture here. Who are the winners? Obviously, Russia is a huge winner now. They have a swing capacity with pumping oil, and they have plenty of gas. The other people that are making out like bandits are American oil producers, because before this war, whatever their costs were to produce their product have remained the same, while the profits have just shot up crazily.
Yeah, but I mean, the prices will still go up. And this is a president who said he was facing midterm elections in November, and who said he'd bring the price of fuel down. I mean, the disruption just of this one attack will sideline 12.8 million tons of LNG annually for 3 to 5 years, and cost 20 billion in lost annual revenue. That's what Saad El-Kaabi, the chief executive of Qatar Energy, says. So it's actually going to have global implications. And you add to that the closure of Hormuz anyway. Now, Hormuz is also extremely interesting. There are ships going through, there are tankers going through Hormuz, but only with Iranian permission. But they have effectively closed by hitting, I think, over 19 other tankers. And Trump will not be able to reopen them. He would have to perform a major land invasion over high ground, which Iran controls. And even then, he really the Hormuz is within range of its short range missiles. So there is absolutely no way he can reopen Hormuz, even given the fact that he's not going to get any help from France or Britain or anyone else. So he's stumbling down a road and has been for 3 weeks, which is costing the world and Asia and also the global south. Everyone's going to feel it. So just simply saying, "Oh well, the American oil companies are going to profit from this," won't help Trump at home. This is not a popular war at home, but really the damage now being done to the Gulf is going to have really global consequences.
Right, but I was sort of wondering, or perhaps implying, David, that the two winners are Putin and the American oil companies, and there's no question that Trump is, whatever the relationship with Putin is, we don't quite know, but he sure as hell defers to him obsequiously on every occasion. And we know that the big oil companies here in the United States were huge backers of his first election and particularly his re-election. So I'm just wondering whether that's the payoff.
Well,
in other words, I'm trying to find something rational about it. You talked about Trump as this egomaniacal guy that's the Colossus astride the world. When Senator Chris Murphy, after a Senate briefing last Thursday, at which they were told that Trump had not considered the possibility of the Straits of Hormuz being controlled, Murphy went to the cameras and said, "I feel sorry for the United States military because their commander-in-chief is a senile old man who is losing his mind."
Well, I'm struggling to find some rationality as well to this attack. He was warned by Saudi Arabia and all of his allies that Iran had the capacity just to close world trade going from the Gulf down at a stroke. This is exactly what has happened. And we're now stuck in a situation where he's running this war in sound bites. And these Israelis themselves don't really know what to do next. There's no off ramp to this. The only off ramp is Trump suddenly declaring that all of his objectives have been achieved, and he'll stop it now. I mean, the problem that all of us have is that we're relying on information, and we sort of absorb some of this information, which is completely wrong. I'll give you one example of the status quo, right? Information that we all had on Hezbollah. We said after the ceasefire 15 months ago that Hezbollah was finished. That was the global consensus around the 27th of November in 2024. Benjamin Netanyahu said that the campaign had set back Hezbollah for decades. A senior US official described it as extremely weak. CENTCOM commander Michael Kurilla went further and called Hezbollah decimated. And now it's not. Hezbollah's missiles are reaching Ashkelon. They are battling away in the south as they did before. They nearly killed Smotrich's son. They're all over the place. Yes, they were very set back by a whole series there. The leadership was wiped out several times. But they've now realized that their communications were totally compromised. And they're now using human couriers again. And it's working. So we had a status quo in which we said that Hezbollah's finished, it should disarm. The Lebanese government was saying in exactly the same way, and now we suddenly realize, whoops, actually they're not finished. They're fighting back, and this is the problem we have with Iran as well. We think that, or rather, Trump thinks that, and Trump and Netanyahu think that decapitating the leadership, which they do very effectively, will stop Iran. Now, within an hour of the first strike on the supreme leader Khamenei, the the system got going, and the missiles started falling. And so Iran's done exactly what it said it warned its neighbors it would do if it was attacked again. It's resilient. It's taken huge losses. I'm not trying to minimize the damage to Iran, but if I were to compare whose strategy is working at the moment, is it Trump's and Netanyahu's with all their massive firepower they've got, or is it Iran's? I'd have to say, as a sort of independent observer, that Iran's strategy appears to be working.
But maybe Israel's strategy is to do what they're doing now, which is to just leave the place in ruins.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a very important point, because there is a difference between what Trump was trying to do and what Netanyahu is trying to do. Trump was trying to effect a very quick regime change. He persuaded himself that Iran was very weak, that now was the time, even though he was negotiating with them, and they produced quite a big concession on the uranium enrichment talks, a concession they hadn't made before. Trump ignored that and said, right, we'll finish them off and it'll be over in 4 days. And it wasn't over in 4 days. Netanyahu doesn't mind if it's not over in 4 days, because what he wants to do is tear Iran down and reduce it to a series of ethnic, a weak collection of ethnically based states, which was his aim in Syria as well. His aim is to install Israeli hegemony over the whole area, and do that by reducing what were once powerful Persian and Arab states, and that is absolutely clear. So that it suits Netanyahu to try and reduce parts of Iran to Gaza or to Beirut or to Lebanon, and just keep hitting them. However, Netanyahu will not be able to defy Trump, and Trump is the flip-flop guy. He's the guy who inevitably chickens out. He's taco,
Right.
I mean,
but just in the last minute or so, does that mean, David, then that all the Iranians have to do is offer up a ceasefire and an agreement to open the Straits of Hormuz, and Trump will jump at that and declare victory?
I'm not sure. I don't think one should say what, because the Iranians are really, really angry. And I'm not sure they will easily stop fighting, even if Trump declares victory. But what I am sure of is that Trump is a weak link in this chain, and he can't sustain turmoil on global turmoil on the LNG markets. Europe can't sustain it. Europe is hostile to it. It's not going to his aid. Starmer correctly refused permission, although, again, we see US bombers landing at RAF Lakenheath, refueling, and arming themselves, and then going off to bomb. So Starmer's refusal to let B-1 bombers use RAF bases is a bit of sophistry. He says we're only helping the Americans for defense, not for attack. But the line between defense and attack with long-range bombers is rather thin. But to his credit, Starmer said, no, this war is wrong, and we're not going to help you bomb Iran. The French have said the same thing. The Germans have said the same thing. Trump is not in a good spot at the moment.
Sure. But why would any of these navies go into the Gulf when the United States Navy won't go into the Gulf? The whole thing makes no sense whatsoever.
It makes no sense. So eventually, I do think Trump will just say, we've done the job, and just stop it.
Right. Well, David, I thank you for joining us. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Again, I've been speaking with David Hearst. He's in the UK. He's the editor of the Middle East Eye. He was formerly the chief foreign leader writer of The Guardian and its former associate foreign editor, Moscow bureau chief, European correspondent, and Ireland correspondent. And he has an article at Middle East Eye, Why Trump and Netanyahu Are the Most Dangerous Men on the Planet. We're going to take a brief station break and back discussing the scenario of the U.S. Marines seizing Iran's crown jewel, Karg Island, and how that could end up delivering the regime hostages of its own. Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Harrison Mann, Associate Director for Campaigns and Policy at Win Without War, a progressive national security advocacy network. His advocacy and public commentary focuses on reforming U.S. Middle East policy and illuminating the connections between foreign and domestic policy. He's a former U.S. Army major assigned to the Defense Intelligence Agency who resigned in protest of the Department of Defense's support for Israeli military in its war on Gaza. And he has an article at Responsible Statecraft, Seizing Iran's Crown Jewel Would Be a Suicide Mission, and another at ZDO, I Was a U.S. Intelligence Analyst. Here's what a ground invasion of Iran would look like. Welcome to Background Briefing, Harrison Mann.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for joining us, Harrison. And the Marine Expeditionary Force is on its way. We don't know what their mission will be. There's some talk of sending them ashore on the Iranian side of the Straits of Hormuz after they've been dropping bunker buster bombs on that neighborhood. But there's an awful lot of high ground behind the shoreline there. And then the other place, of course, is Karg Island, which, if you point out in your article at Responsible Statecraft, Trump's friend and cheerleader in the Senate, Lindsey Graham, urged Trump to finish the job. Mr. President, take Karg Island and this war is over. I take it you don't think it's going to be quite that rosy.
Correct. It's really troubling to see influential politicians like Lindsey Graham, who unfortunately is quite influential, bandying about these ideas, really like they're playing with GI Joes, that you can send U.S. troops after these objectives and it's going to be easy. Graham caught a little heat recently for saying he would happily send South Carolina's sons and daughters to die for Iran. If you sent troops after these islands or even after the coast, as others are proposing, it would be incredibly dangerous and you'd expect very high losses for, I think, minimal strategic payoff. You did an excellent Lindsey Graham impression there. He was urging on Fox News the increasingly prevalent idea, which I saw repeated again today in the Wall Street Journal, that if U.S. troops can somehow seize this critical oil terminal on Karg Island, that would be enough leverage to force the Iranian government to basically surrender. There's two reasons that this is just totally wrong, both the strategic logic and the actual tactical plan. Strategically, I think it's absurd to think that surviving Iranian leadership, and remember, the US and Israel have assassinated dozens of them, surviving Iranian leadership who understand that they are in a fight not just for the survival of their government, but their own personal survival, would somehow be scared at the idea of losing oil infrastructure that they probably expected to get blown up anyway. I think, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, there are two reasons why I understand the IRGC and the Basij will fight to the bitter end. One is that they're being targeted, at least the leadership is. But two is that they know that because of their brutal treatment of their own people, that if the people were able to rise up, and that's a big if, they would go after these guys and their families.
Yeah, I think that aspect is certainly there. But at this point, think of all the other Iranians, both civilians and people in the regular military, who've had family members bombed. and displaced and maimed. And those folks, I don't think their priority is uprising right now. So I think you have the very predictable rally around the flag effect in Iran. So not just hardliners, not just the core internal or external loyalist security services, but I think probably the entire military is quite motivated right now. Which is why the idea, the other part of this plan that, oh, if we cut off the oil, they won't be able to pay their troops, and that will somehow make them lay down their arms is also really ridiculous. Because again, these people's families are being bombed right now.
So, Harrison, as a former U.S. Army officer in the DIA, a week ago, Thursday, the senators were given a briefing by the administration, and at which the Trump administration, admitted that Trump didn't think that the Straits of Hormuz would be closed. And they left this meeting in absolute shock. And Senator Chris Murphy went to the cameras and said, "I feel sorry for the U.S. military because their commander-in-chief is a senile old man who is losing his mind." Is that a prevalent feeling going on in the military? I mean, they're just as aware, I think, as American citizens are of this massive folly underway in the Gulf. I think only somewhere between 20 and 30% of the country supports this war. So is that a reasonable projection that people are wondering about the mental acuity of their commander-in-chief?
I think the biggest concern is the general lack of care over the lives of service members. I think whether you think Trump is mentally sound probably aligns with a lot of people's political views and political affiliations. I think the much larger issue and the much more immediate issue for troops, especially those who are in the region or maybe sent to the region, is the very clear lack of planning and lack of interest in protecting troops' lives, both before and during this war. I always want to point out that the first soldiers who died, six Army soldiers who were killed by a drone, really died in a likely preventable way. They were operating their command center out of basically an unarmored trailer, like a shack, with no overhead cover or none of the really rudimentary protections you could have installed to make it more survivable by drone strike. And I think that really set the stage for the entire conduct of this war, which is you have a Secretary of Defense and President who are shockingly not really pretending to be troubled when troops die. And that same ethos is on display now when you have politicians talking about sending them on what I've called a suicide mission to take these islands or take the coast in Iran.
Well, the strike on the U.S. military in Kuwait, apparently the intel for that was provided by Putin. So I think it's worse than that, isn't it? Not only does Trump and Hegseth not really care about the lives of U.S. service people, but they don't seem to be bothered by the fact that Trump defers to Putin. He's rewarding him. He's the only winner so far in this war. So I find that deeply troubling.
In a previous assignment, when I was at the Defense Intelligence Agency, one of my roles was on an emergency rotation where we were helping pass intelligence to the Ukrainian military to help them fight Russia. And it's not surprising at all to see Russia do the exact same thing back to us. But the only reason they can do it is because we gave them the chance. Russia did not start this war. Russia did not create the circumstances where they were even in a place to help anybody kill Americans. They've jumped at that chance. But the person who created the opportunity was Trump, by launching the war and by getting into a position where they finally pushed the Iranian government far enough that they were willing to start trying to get kills in on U.S. troops.
So, Harrison, let's turn to your article at Responsible Statecraft. Seizing Iran's crown jewels would be a suicide mission. An operation to hold Tehran's oil hostage by taking over Cargo Island could end up delivering the regime hostages of its own. First of all, Trump is on a tear insulting America's NATO allies for being cowards and not sending their navies into the Gulf. Well, the U.S. Navy won't go into the Gulf. So how would you be able to even launch a seaborne attack on Hog Island if the Navy can't even get into that area?
That's an excellent point. Kharg Island is about 500 miles past the Strait of Hormuz, which, as you point out, the U.S. Navy thinks is too dangerous for it to go into. So I think any shipborne amphibious assault should be considered out of the question, and anybody who is proposing that should not be taken seriously. Much more likely, I think, would be heliborne or by helicopter, which we in the Army call air assault. The Marine Expeditionary Unit that's sailing to the region has a lot of helicopters and Ospreys on it, which could theoretically transport hundreds of troops at a time onto any objective. That, however, is still extremely dangerous. A flying helicopter, and even much more so, a landing helicopter is a really vulnerable target to missiles, drones, conventional weapons, artillery. The island in question is only about 15 miles off the coast of mainland Iran. So you don't need sophisticated weaponry to target troops on that island. You could use artillery systems that were designed in the 60s or 70s, rockets, and still hit forces there. A landing helicopter is a very tempting and very easy target.
Well, Senator Tammy Duckworth could definitely second that because she lost her legs in Iraq, and she's been one of the most outspoken people in the Senate about Trump's disregard for our military and the lives of the service people who he's putting in harm's way without any apparent strategy or plans. So given that he recently, both he and Hegseth were thrilled with the bombing of Hog Island, which Trump then said, of course, out of decency, we didn't hit the oil depots. Do you know what they hit?
No, they claimed they hit 90 military targets. Some analysts saw that and said, I don't think there are 90 military targets on this island that's only 5 miles long. We know they bombed the airstrip. They probably bombed other bunkers or military positions that they knew the location of, but we really don't know what's there. Hegseth and Trump have lied continuously since the start of the war about what they've hit and the extent of the damage. The Minab school is a famous example of that, but they've also made unverifiable claims about how many of Iran's air defenses or drones or missiles they've destroyed. And there's even been a press conference where Hegseth is standing next to General Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and they're giving two different figures about how many targets they've hit. So I don't think we can assume that that island is defenseless. We can't assume there aren't fortified or subterranean facilities that still have troops on them. We certainly can't assume that U.S. troops would be landing there unopposed.
So what is going on then with Hegseth continually? I mean, in a way, because he comes out of Fox News and Trump comes out of reality TV. It seems like this is kind of a reality TV war where you keep promoting the next episode. You end on a cliffhanger and you say, coming up soon, in the sequel. In this case, he keeps talking, Hegseth keeps talking about there's more to come, bigger and better, more shock and awe. What do they have up their sleeve?
They clearly have nothing up their sleeve. Donald Trump has quite openly been in a state of shock since day two of this war when it didn't turn out exactly the same as Venezuela, which is what he expected and what he's still hoping to get out of this against all odds. Pete Hegseth has continued to brag about number of targets hit, quantity of ordnance dropped. Those are the kind of metrics we used to get from generals in the Vietnam War. And they've been derided since then as totally meaningless when you're talking about strategic progress. Okay, you dropped 6,000 bombs. On what? Is it preventing Iran from firing missiles or drones? Obviously, it's not. Is it preventing Iran from blocking the Strait of Hormuz? Obviously not. So Hegseth keeps promising bigger and better bombing runs, and he could be telling the truth, right? We could drop twice as many bombs tomorrow as we did today. Doesn't mean it's going to destroy anything meaningful. It doesn't mean it's going to destroy the key capabilities of the Iranian military. If we knew where all those things are, I think we would have hit them in the first 2 weeks of the war.
So the Vietnam War metric, of course, was a body count. This time is what? How much ordnance we drop? Because Hegseth is asking for an extra 200 billion.
Yes, and just on the first point there, bragging about how much ordnance you dropped is what you can do when you don't even know what the body count is, right? If they had an idea of how many Iranian troops they'd killed, they would be advertising it broadly. The fact that he's saying, well, we dropped 1,000 bombs today means he has no clue. On the $200 billion supplemental funding bill that the administration is expected to request, we need to understand that none of this will have a material effect on the fighting on the ground now. The weapons that they want to order may take years to deliver. So it's very important to understand that you are not shortchanging US troops by refusing to fund this bill. What you are doing as a member of Congress is showing your full-throated support for the war. A vote to fund this bill is a vote for Trump's Iran war. And there are some members of Congress who are probably going to try and pretend that that's not the case. But both theoretically and legally, this means a member of Congress is supporting the war. Korea and Vietnam, Congress never declared war. Congress never passed an authorization for the use of military force, but they did pass funding bills. And we have some legal precedent from federal court cases since then that Congress agreeing to fund those wars was de facto authorization for those wars.
So just in closing then, Harrison, do you think Trump is going to declare victory no matter what happens, pull himself out of this mess?
That's the best case scenario because I want this war to end as soon as possible. And he's bombed enough things that he could say, well, we did it. The problem, and I don't consider the Iranian people an enemy, and the Iranian government doesn't need to be an enemy of America, but the enemy always has a vote. And ultimately, Iran, and to a lesser extent, Israel, have a big say in when this war ends. If Trump tried to end it tomorrow, and Iranian government has told U.S. press that they've received and rejected outreach from the Trump administration. But if Trump tried to end the war tomorrow, there's a good chance the Iranian government would say no. They'd say we have not yet inflicted enough costs on the U.S. and its allies to feel that we are guaranteed to not be attacked again, like happened last month. So we also have to wait till we get to the point where the Iranian government feels satisfied with the destruction it's caused and feels like it's safe from a future unprovoked attack.
Right, and they're probably leery about sitting down negotiating with a country that uses negotiations as a disguise for a military attack. So I thank you for joining us. I appreciate it, Harrison. I hope we can speak again.
Thank you so much.
And again, I'll be speaking with Harrison Mann, who's Associate Director for Campaigns and Policy at Win Without War, a progressive national security advocacy network. His advocacy and public commentary focuses on reforming U.S. Middle East policy and illuminating the connections between foreign and domestic policy. He's a former U.S. Army major assigned to the Defense Intelligence Agency who resigned in protest of the Department of Defense's support for Israel's military in its war on Gaza. And he has an article at Responsible Statecraft, Seizing Iran's Crown Jewel Would Be a Suicide Mission, and another at ZDO, I Was a U.S. Intelligence Analyst. Here's what a ground invasion of Iran could look like. We're going to take a brief station break and back looking into how Trump and the U.S. are being played as we deplete our big, expensive Cold War-inspired defensive weapons on Iran's cheap drones.
So kiss me and smile for me. Tell me that you'll wait for me. Hold me like you'll never let me go. 'Cause I'm leaving on a jet plane. Don't know when I'll be back again. Oh babe, I hate to go.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Mike Lofgren, who formerly spent 28 years working in Congress as a Republican aide, 16 of which as a senior national security analyst on the House and Senate Budget Committees. He's the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Party Is Over, How Republicans Went Crazy, Democrats Became Useless, and the Middle Class Got Shafted. And he has an article at the Washington Monthly, Asymmetrical War in Iran, How Trump and the U.S. Are Being Played. We're depleting our big, expensive Cold War-inspired defensive weapons on Iran's cheap drones. And if Tehran expands its underwater drone program, look out. Welcome to Background Briefing, Mike Lofgren.
Good to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us. And of course, today we're learning that Hegseth and the Pentagon want over $200 billion in extra funds for Trump's and Netanyahu's war on Iran, which I think something like 20% of the American people support. What's the latest figure?
Yeah, I haven't seen the latest, but it's probably the first one I saw was an Ipsos poll. It was 27%. You know, it may have fluctuated since then, but I doubt it's over 50%.
So we've already seen, as your article points out, for the U.S. Navy's war on the Houthi rebels, which, by the way, the Russians had ships in there providing intelligence to the Iranians, who in turn were providing it to the Houthis. So the same thing is happening now, that Putin is giving Iran targeting satellite data so they can hit the Americans. At the same time, Trump is sucking up to Putin. But just to touch on what the U.S. Navy experienced with the Houthi rebels, that between 2023 and 2024, the Navy fired 100 of these Standard missiles at roughly 2.4 million per missile. And apparently the ability to replace them means he can only make about 100 of them a year. So already we depleted the Standard missile, which is on most Navy ships. And then, as you point out, the unit cost for the Patriot Advanced Capability System is approximately $3.9 million to $4.2 million. But a full Patriot battery costs over $1 billion. And the U.S. and its partners have expended about 800 Patriots, which is more than what the Ukrainians have been using in its 4-year war with Russia. And of course, now the Ukrainians are down there in the Gulf helping the U.S. out with advanced counter-drone intel and technology, which the Ukrainians have developed. But again, Trump doesn't like Ukraine, he likes Russia. So can you make some sense out of what alleged strategy is going on here?
Well, it's impossible to make sense of it. I mean, Hegseth, who's running the Pentagon, says somehow that the Russians providing target intelligence for all over the Gulf from their GLONASS satellites to Iran somehow isn't a factor. I mean, he apparently is well enough embedded into the MAGA psychological world that he understands to stay on the right side of Trump, Russia can never be seen as doing anything bad. I mean, aside from the business of them providing that, Trump, in the face of that, has loosened the sanctions on Russian oil, which provides a huge windfall for the Putin in order to finance his war against Ukraine.
Well, the other system, just to go through your article, is the THAAD Terminal High Altitude Defense System. They cost $12.6 million per copy, and during Israel's 12-day war against Iran in June, they used up 150 THAADs, which is 25% of the estimated inventory. And the replacement cost or production ability to replace them is what, about 50 per year? So,
something like that.
Yeah. So if you look through all of these, the Patriots, the THAAD, the Standard missiles, we're burning through this inventory at the expense of Ukraine because we're no longer supplying them. We had to deal with the NATO countries to buy them and then to transfer them to Ukraine, but I take it that's not happening anymore. So we're hanging out Ukraine to dry in order to fire these incredibly expensive missiles at these cheap Iranian drones.
That's correct. And not only that, I mean, it's a twofer. We're not only depleting the ability to resupply Ukraine, pretty much there goes our deterrence in the South China Sea against a potential conflict with China over Taiwan. And not just the missiles, but that 2,200 personnel Marine Expeditionary Unit that is being sent to the Gulf. Where is that being taken? That's being taken from East Asia, where it was there as kind of a deterrent against China. And I can imagine our East Asian allies, well, I considered them allies, and most people did. Apparently, Trump doesn't anymore. Like Japan or South Korea, they're saying, hey, you're just moving these assets away from us. At the same time, you are cutting off 20% of the world's oil supply, and the East Asian Rim is heavily dependent on oil. Far more than 20% of their supply comes through the Persian Gulf, and that's been cut off now.
Well, the South Koreans are also complaining about the transfer of THAAD and Patriot batteries from their confrontation with North Korea on a hot border. That's being sent to the Gulf as well. So not only are we driving up the energy costs for our allies in Asia like Japan and South Korea, we're also taking away military assets that would be defending them. So
that is correct.
And then the Japanese Prime Minister is scheduled to meet with Trump, right? So presumably she's going to complain to him, but I don't think he cares. I mean, he only seems to care about how much money he can make out of the Saudis via Jared. I mean, this is what's going on. This is Jared and Witkoff, who, along with Netanyahu, who talked Trump into this war. They're all making
basically, yes.
But they're making money out of this war. Apparently, Jared's asking the Saudis for an extra $5 billion. He's got them in this pickle, but now he's saying, "Well, you know, I need another. You need to give me another $5 billion to get you out of the pickle."
That's right. There was a Washington Post article that came out immediately after the start of the war that said something to the effect that although publicly Mohammed bin Salman and the Saudi leadership were talking about negotiation and peacefully solving the issues with Iran, in reality, he had called Trump several times in the previous months before the war, advocating that Trump go to war. And when you consider that Trump has made and his family have made, according to the New Yorker's estimate, about $4 billion off the presidency in the last year. And the fact the lion's share came out of the Persian Gulf, including Saudi Arabia, this is kind of a reciprocity among authoritarians. He doesn't want to go to war or even just supply weapons to protect a democracy against an authoritarian regime like Russia, but he will go to war as a kind of authoritarian reciprocity for all the favors that Mohammed bin Salman and the UAE and Qatar have been showering on him.
Right, and MBS, Prince Bonesaw, is hardly a great military strategist. He got Saudi Arabia embroiled into the war with the Houthis, which has been an ongoing disaster.
That's correct.
So tell us more about not just the fact that the Iranians firing these $20,000 drones, which Russia was supplied with against Ukraine. The Russians then re-engineered them with fiber optic cables so that they can't be jammed. And I assume that the Iranians have the latest versions of the Shahed. Ironically, the U.S. is way behind in drone technology, and their Lucas, it's called, drone is based upon the Iranian Shahed, right?
Yes. Heretofore, the drones we've been using are these enormous things that aren't much less expensive than a manned aircraft. The Reaper drone was like 32 million or something like that a copy. It can vary. It could be more than that depending on the payload of sensors. But already in 2020, an Air Force official admitted more or less that we should retire these things because they're rather easily shot down. And I think the proof of that is they've used them in this war, and the exact figures aren't really known because of the fog of war, but it's believed around a dozen of these Reaper drones have been shot down by the Iranians or otherwise suffered mishaps. So that's 12 times $32 million per unit cost on average. So we're getting a close to 400 million loss on just one type of drone. And, you know, as they say in the cliche, sooner or later that adds up to real money.
Right, and early in the war, the U.S. lost 3 F-18Es, which replacement costs are about $90 million per copy. So that's close to 300 million shot down early in the day by the Kuwaitis, our allies, who you can't really blame for it because guess what? We never gave the deconfliction data to the Kuwaitis. So.
Well, that's right. At the very beginning of the war, Hegseth, in his usual Neanderthal way, was beating his chest about how we don't have rules of engagement for this war because we're not going to have a politically correct war. Well, rules of engagement involve such things as deconfliction and avoiding fratricide among one's own troops and among the allied troops. And given the way the Trump regime governs, it wouldn't surprise me that this was thrown together in a very haphazard way. I'll give you another for instance. We have very few minesweepers, and 4 of them that were based in Bahrain and the Gulf were decommissioned last October or November and then taken out of the Gulf in mid-January, just as the buildup into the Middle East was already beginning. I mean, that is a move of unbelievable stupidity.
Right, and I think the only ones that are left are in Japan, and they're wooden hulled so that they don't attract what mines are usually have magnetic.
But it's a lot harder to detect mines with your own magnetic anomaly detectors if you have to do it with a steel-hulled ship. That's why they're wooden or
right.
fiberglass hulled.
So let's talk about the Iranian submarine undersurface ASDAR, unmanned underwater vehicle, that you are concerned about. What is it and what can it do?
I mean, you can consider it kind of a small unmanned submarine, or you can consider it a more sophisticated version of the torpedo. It doesn't travel as fast as a U.S. Navy torpedo or what you think of as a torpedo, but it's very maneuverable. It is very silent and has a long range because it's lithium ion electric powered, and that would make it much more difficult to detect. And it can be sort of autonomously guided, and it can, at least theoretically, patrol for about 4 days until it finds a target. And something like that could be a game changer if you consider that the submarine was really the decisive naval weapon in two world wars. This is yet another step in that direction.
So what kind of numbers are deployed? Because Trump, in his senile lunacy, is castigating his NATO allies in China and Japan and a whole bunch of countries for not sending their fleets into the Gulf when the U.S. Navy won't go there in the first place. So I imagine one of the reasons the U.S. Navy doesn't want to go into the Gulf is because of these Iranian underwater drones.
That could very well be one reason. Now, I don't know exactly how many of these they have and how deployable they actually are right now, but certainly the Iranians have had the capability with both aerial drones and surface drones. They take the very simple expedient of just having small skiffs loaded with explosives and autonomously guided and disguise them as fishing boats. And I believe they've struck 2 tankers so far. And if the Navy had some sort of low-risk countermeasure to these things, given how frantic Trump is about reopening the Strait of Hormuz, I think they would have used it.
So this is an extraordinary situation to think that we're in this war that, according to our Secretary of State, was foisted on us by Israel. And now Israel apparently, we know that they blew up a part of the main gas field that the Iranians have that supplies 90% of its domestic gas consumption. Now Trump complained about the Israelis hitting the Pars gas field because the Iranians have reciprocated by attacking the big LNG facilities in Qatar and other facilities in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. And they have the potential of really shutting down all oil productions, not just the export of it, but actually the production and storage of it in the Gulf, which would be catastrophic and have long-term consequences and create energy crises for Europe and for Asia and for the rest of the world. And the only winners in that scenario are, guess who? Russia and U.S. oil producers. So is Trump paying back big oil that gave him so much money?
Who knows what goes through his head? This is probably something historians will be arguing about 20 years from now. Just what is the precise order and magnitude of the various influences that made this guy want to go to war? Because there's certainly not anything whatever to do with the U.S. national interest.
Well, Mike, I thank you for joining us. I appreciate your work here on the asymmetry of this war and how much damage Iran can do on the cheap to these big ticket items that the American taxpayer subsidizes. And of course, now Hegseth wants another $200 billion. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And again, I've been speaking with Mike Lofgren, who formerly spent 28 years working in Congress as a Republican aide, 16 of which as a senior national security analyst on the House and Senate budget committees. He's the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Party is Over, How Republicans Went Crazy, Democrats Became Useless, and the Middle Class Got Shafted. And he has an article at the Washington Monthly, Asymmetrical War in Iran, How Trump and the U.S. are being played. We are depleting our big, expensive Cold War-inspired defensive weapons on Iran's cheaper drones. And if Tehran expands its underwater drone program, look out. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Asher Price, and Sasha Linden-Cohen. If you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews, searchable by topic, and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates and provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook at Ian Masters Media, and our new social media manager, Luke Susswood, is also posting highlights from the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Ian Masters Media. So please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate and/or at publictruthmedia.org, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back tomorrow with another Background Briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.